Okay, so figured bass, first lesson. Figured bass was a system, a shorthand method that was used extensively in the Baroque era, essentially beginning with the early 17th century. Composers started using figures under a bass line to indicate the chords that should be played above that bass line. Uh, Probably the reason for this was that singers would not always show up to performances as long as music was written mostly for the church. This was not a problem. But once we start having more secular performances and people traveling longer distances, singers would not show up, and the composer needed to know which notes they intended to play above the bass, or if the composer was not playing the harmonic instruments, such as a keyboard instrument or a lute, a guitar-like instrument. They needed a system to indicate which notes should be played to make up for those singers that were not around. This is probably the reason. Regardless of how this developed, it became a very important system for writing music, composing music, and teaching music. We know that many composers, not beginning, but we know that Bach, Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven, even Ravel studied figured bass, played figured bass, and taught figured bass to their student as a primary method of becoming a better musician. So this is a very good way to improve musicianship, and this is why we're going to study it now with these videos. So if there are no figures, as you look at the example, our figured bass lesson 1 example, there are no figures actually. There's just a bass line and no numbers at all. So when there are no numbers at all, we always want to play the third, the fifth, and perhaps the octave or the same note in the right hand. So if we just look at this bass line, lift the level here again. So by not having any figures under the bass, what we understand from this figured bass is that all we need to do is play the third and the fifth and perhaps the octave above the given bass. So we're going to start with the third, and we're just going to figure out what the third is for a very basic step. So with C we'll play E, with G we want to play B, with A we want to play C, with E we want to play G, F we'll add an A, and to the G we'll add a B, and then another E to the C. Obviously this is not very good voice leading, but this is just to get an idea of what notes we're looking for with each chord. So after we added the third, and you hear it already sounds like we have a harmonic progression, not just a bass line. Let's add the fifth as well. So this is what I'd like to call the stage 1 of figured bass realization. So all we do is we take the bass, we interpret the figures, and we play the notes just in the original position that they appear. These are all 5/3 chords. Okay, we just try to get all the notes in. If we want to do this in a 4-part harmony, we would just add the 8th. Okay, so before we move on, I highly recommend getting the hang of playing it just like this, with very basic voice leading, just all the chords as they appear to you. Let's do it one more time and try to play with me. Okay, now we're trying to get the voice leading to be a little bit better. than just having all the voices move together, because we're trying to get a very smooth and a sense that we have some kind of counterpoint, that the voices, each of the voices moves independently to a certain degree from the other voices. So what we're going to do in our stage 2 of figured bass realization is we're just going to try to move in the shortest possible route. And the shortest possible route for notes that are common tones between the two chords is obviously staying the same. So if I play the first chord, C, E, G, C, you notice that G is a member of this chord. And so in the next chord, G, we obviously have another G. So we want to keep that G where it is, meaning now the G is, if we look at the voices, we have soprano, alto, tenor, bass. We want that G to stay in the alto, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. So we want the other voices, other than the bass, to move in the shortest possible route. So C, the shortest possible route is to B, and E, the shortest possible route is to D. So this is why we had our stage 1. We wanted to make sure that we know what notes are in the next chord. So C, E, G, C, G, B, D, G. And now C, E, G, C, G, D, G, B. So we kept the G in place, the C moved to B, the E moved down to G. Now to the next chord, the shortest possible route will probably be just moving all the notes up by a step. In a minute we'll see that that's not the best choice, but for stage 2, that is the choice that we will make. So we have a common tone, and now we don't have a common tone, so all the voices move together. Again, we have a common tone, E is going to stay, and C will go down to B, A to G. And now again, we don't have a common tone, we don't have a common tone. And again, from a G chord to a C chord, we have one tone in common. If you notice, whenever the bass moves by a descending fourth or a descending fifth, and the fourth and the fifth are inversions of each other, whenever it moves by a fourth, we have one common tone. Whenever it moves by a second, we have no common tones. That's true when all the chords are 5/3 chords. So now we have all the notes in, and we have the shortest possible route moving from one chord to the next. Make sure that you can play this before moving on to stage 3 of figured bass realization. Let's do it one more time. Now the problem with stage 2, especially in this case, is that we actually have a lot of what we call parallel octaves and parallel fifths. You might know this from studying written harmony or counterpoint. And parallel fifths and octaves are not permissible in this style. The reason that parallel octaves are not permissible is that we essentially lose a voice. So suddenly we don't have actually 4 parts, we actually have 3 parts. Parallel fifths, it's more of an aesthetic choice of the period. It has to do with the history of how harmony was developed, how early on parallel fifths and fourths were everything that was consonant, and then that choice reversed. Regardless, we're going to try to avoid those. Also, we don't want all the voices moving in the same direction unless we're at the very end of a cadence, and then we can have all the voices descending. But in this case, it's really not the best choice to create a sense of counterpoint. It's not the best choice. So let's find those parallels. From C to G, no parallels. But from G to A, we have parallel octaves and parallel fifths, and all the voices are moving in the same direction. So usually, when we have a second in the bass between 2 5/3 chords, we want all the upper voices to move descend rather than ascend with the motion. If the motion in the bass is ascending, we want the other voices to descend, and vice versa. And that solves all the parallel issues. Once again, we have a common tone, that's E. We're going to work around it. And again, from E to F, all the top voices will move down, and from F to G, all the top voices will descend. You notice here, I'm only playing 3 notes, but essentially I'm doubling the G. It's both the tenor and the bass. Okay. Now you saw that the right hand and the left hand here kind of got very close to each other. So I'm going to try with a different soprano position, beginning with E in the soprano. If I begin with E in the soprano, the whole exercise comes out more smooth. So let's try it again. So it's a 5/3 chord. We have C, E, G, C, and then the G stays the same. The other voices descend, closest possible root. Now all the right hand voices descend while the left hand ascends because we want to avoid parallels. Again, we have one common tone. Contrary motion. Once again, from F to G, we need more contrary motion, and then common tone motion. Okay, so let's go through the 3 stages again and try to play them with This was our first stage, just to get the notes in. Our second stage, closest motion possible, but we still have parallels. In our third stage, we avoid parallels by using contrary motion when the bass moves by a second. Now that we're done, we know the voice leading, now we can write it out. A lot of times students will start by writing out the voice leading and then memorizing it. I highly recommend doing the reverse, starting with a keyboard, figuring all the voices out, and then writing the correct voice leading when you have all that figured out. Sorry. So that's figured bass lesson number 1.